सर नहीं दिखता है लैपटॉप को थोड़ा
नहीं लैपटॉप में सर को थोड़ा शेयर करेंगे क्योंकि वो कैमरा काम कर रहा है लैपटॉप सर थोड़ी सी हाँ थोड़ी सी
Now we have started.
Can we see the grid?
grid show बनाना है
Exactly.
सर वहाँ से आपको करना पड़ेगा.
Admit कर लीजिए.
लोग मेडिसिन में भी तो करेंगे
मेडिसिन तो
हो गया
Good morning. Am I audible to all of you?
Start कर लिया.
Good morning.
Yes, all of it. Please continue.
Good morning, all of you. Once again, it's my privilege to welcome all of you who have logged in to this our new series of lectures on Nobel Prizes 2020. This series is being organized on behalf of NGO, the Society for Promotion of Science and Technology in India, the Chandigarh chapter of National Academy of Sciences of India, the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Mohali, and other institutions, higher education institutions in Chandigarh, from where we source out our research persons. For long, the institutions in Chandigarh have been organizing lectures on Nobel Prizes on an annual basis, but one institution organizes 2 lectures, another institution or maybe organize 3 lectures, Punjab University was perhaps doing 4. So we thought, let's consolidate lectures, not for a specific audience of an institution, but we should organize lectures for the general audience on all the Nobel Prizes given in a year. So with this thought in mind, the new series have been commenced, and we are going to host lectures on all the Nobel Prizes before the Nobel Prize event on December 10, 2020. So we have sourced out the experts, not only from our institutions in the city, but also we have sourced out an expert in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. So we are going to cover the lectures in sciences, plus the lectures in economics, as well as the lecture on the Peace Prize this year, literature, and also we have also added the literature. So we are going to cover all these subjects, and this would be an annual feature for the Chandigarh city, but since we are going to have a webcast, so it's something like a national event for the general audience. So this is our intent, and this is our resolve that we will make it a national event and hold it in this way every year. So as I said, that these lectures are a general audience, and by general audience we mean students from class 9 to 12, their parents, their teachers, the college teachers, as well as the teachers and the scientists from the higher education institutions, at least from the Chandigarh regions. Those who can join from outside, we will be even more happy. And I can see on the screen, Professor Vijay Dhar from Bombay has also joined as a part of our audience today. So we are well aware as parents, grandparents, that the students, particularly from class 9 to 12, they are under pressure to prepare for all these competitive exams. Everybody wants to get into a good institution, whether a technological institution or a medical science institutions or whatever, maybe even a national law institute or architecture degree, or to join a liberal arts university. The students are in that mood to learn and prepare. So while they prepare for these, on the side, they also prepare for the National Science Olympiads. Preliminary rounds of National Science Olympiad. The National Science Olympiad preliminary rounds are conducted by Association of Teachers in the country. There is an Indian Association of Physics teachers, chemistry teachers, biology teachers, math teachers. They conduct these things in various districts, and finally, some 30 odd people are selected for a training camp in Bombay, and then from that, 6 persons go for a maths Olympiad competition, chemistry, physics, and so on and so forth. And these students have been doing well at an international level. They bring in lots of medals, silver, gold, and bronze, and the government of India honors them every year on December 22nd, that is the Ramanujan birthday. The government of India gives them some award, and the Infosys Science Foundation, Sudha Murthy ji also instituted the foundation, and that foundation also gives these awards to these students. So, in the contemporary India, these students are not left there, but the government has created the Indian Institutes of Science Education and Research, where the Olympiad medal winners or the Kishore Vidyanik Protsahan Yojana students or the good students who wish to pursue a career in science and mathematics and so on, they are taken in as a kind of a direct entry. So this 8 plus 2, 10 ISER-like institutions in India have started to turn out about 1,500 to 2,000 students who are very well trained in India, and hopefully about 2/3 to 3/4 of them go on to do a PhD at the end of this education, which commences from class 12 and goes up to the PhD. So India is putting into the global market for research over 1,000 PhDs. We anticipate a large number of them would return and serve the Indian academic institutions. And so hopefully in 20 years from now, at the centenary of India's independence, we will have good nominations in every subject in which the Nobel Prizes are given from within India itself. It's not that since independence, Indians have not been nominated for Nobel Prize. Numbers are small, but Indians have been nominated, and at least three of them educated in India, and maybe even those who have taught in India, and I recounted it last time. Venki Ramakrishnan, who was a part of the National Science Student Search Scheme in the 1960s and 70s, and the 2 economics Nobel Prize winners have also been educated in India, and they have also taught in Indian institutions. So I personally anticipate that all these efforts, NGOs trying to organize lectures, government agencies trying to source out good students, national institutions trying to train these good students, and the other national institutions wanting to employ these good students who complete their PhDs and want to be innovative teachers and researchers. All this will eventually lead to our presence in the Nobel Prize winners every year in few decades from now. But we have to sustain this effort continuously, okay, not in a planned way, but in some way we have to self-synergize our efforts so that our young people do hope that the society is wanting to nurture them, reward them, and so on, so that they remain motivated. It's a long process of nurturing. I mean, it takes 10, 12 years before you reach a stage that you are an independent scientist. So the support of everyone is needed. Societal support, parental support, government support, NGO support, and of course also the corporate sector, which sustains all these things in some way, either via the corporate social responsibility or giving taxes to the government from where all these things can be funded. So it is with this spirit we have started to organize, and I'm very happy that we had a very good audience for the first lecture, which was delivered by none other than Dr. Chawla, former director of PGI, who himself was a nationally recognized person, not only in his profession, but also by Government of India with a Padma Shri award. So we have made a good beginning, and I'm very happy that we are reached the lecture number 2. So I conclude my remarks here, and I now invite Tia Dharamveer, my colleague, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Professor Grover. It is a pleasure and a privilege to introduce Professor Madhu Khullar, who, after meritorious service rendered at PGI Chandigarh, superannuated recently. She now holds the prestigious position of Emeritus Scientist by ICMR in the Department of Experimental Medicine and Biotechnology, PGI Chandigarh. Madhu is BSc Honours and MSc Honours Biochemistry from Punjab University. She did her PhD in Biochemistry at PGI Chandigarh and has been a research fellow and a research associate again at PGI. She has also held a postdoctoral position at Henry Ford Hospital, Michigan, USA. She joined PGI in 1985 as assistant professor, where she continued till 2018 and retired as a professor. She has been an NIH fellow of the USA at the Johns Hopkins University for 2 years. At PGI, she was also professor in charge academics. Her honors and awards are many. To mention just a few, she is a fellow of the National Academy of Medical Sciences. She is a fellow of International Academy of Cardiovascular Sciences and a member of Research Advisory Committee of AIIMS, New Delhi. She has been a topper in the university, in Punjab University, where she studied. She has got prestigious research fellowships, and I can see in her CV that she has got the Best Paper Award in many national and international conferences. This shows what a serious and competent biochemist she is, with research interest in a wide variety of fields in medicine. She is a member of a number of scientific organizations. In particular, she is a member of a number of task forces of ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research. She is on the editorial board of 6 international journals dealing with nephrology, hepatology, etc., other than biochemistry. She is a reviewer for 20 journals, national and international. I marvel at the variety of topics she has dealt with. Madhu ji, aapne shareer ka koi bhi ang choda nahi. And in my personal capacity, I found her to be a very good storyteller. So we are excitedly looking forward to this lecture. Madhu Khullar.
Over to you, Professor Madhu Khullar ji.
Thank you, Professor Kea, for such a nice introduction. I think being in PGI makes you interact with a lot of people, and I have been collaborating with different departments, so that is why probably I'm being seen that I'm not left anywhere. I was just trying to collaborate or help my clinical colleagues in continuing research, and I think I have a satisfaction that I was able to initiate research into various clinical departments and which are still continuing. So that has been a very good experience for me. And it's really, thank you, Kea, for inviting me to give this talk. And it's a pleasure, and I hope I'm able to do justice. I've kept the talk very simple so that it is easily understandable by the students. And I'm sure I see that a lot of in the audience, they are very senior scientists also, so they may find my talk very preliminary, but it's an overview, and I have been told that there will be another talk on the same topic later on by a scientist from ICER. So I think whatever are my deficiencies will be taken over by that person. So can I start my talk? Please, can I have the slides?
Sure, ma'am.
Or should I share my screen?
Yes, you can share, ma'am.
Okay. So is it visible, my slides?
Not now, ma'am.
Then I think we will go with your, okay? Let's not waste time.
Okay.
So I will just use the ones which, I'll use your screen, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
So since I'm going to speak on the Nobel Prize for the chemistry, which has been awarded to, so the topic I've kept is CRISPR-Cas9, a revolutionary gene editing tool. I'm not able to get the screen. Yeah. So the Nobel Prize for the chemistry this year has gone to women scientists, and Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer A. Doudna. And it is for the first time that the chemistry prize has been shared by the two women scientists. So being a women scientist myself, it's a great honor for, I think, all of the women scientists all over the world that this prize has been given to the two women, and Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna. So they got this. Next slide, please. The next slide, please. No. For the discovery of genetic Caesars, which are called CRISPR-Cas9, it is a technology that has allowed unprecedented abilities to change the code of life, which is DNA. That is, that we can change the nucleotides, we can edit the DNA by using this CRISPR-Cas9 technology. And little bit in next slide, please. So little introduction to the two ladies, to the women scientists who have got the award. Emmanuelle Charpentier, she's a professor at Max Planck Unit for the Science of Pathogens, Berlin, Germany. And she has discovered a previously unknown molecule, which is known as tracer RNA, which is a trans-active RNA. And as we will go over the talk, we'll see the significance of this RNA. And she showed that tracer RNA is a part of bacteria's ancient bacterial immune system, that is CRISPR-Cas. And this CRISPR-Cas has been shown to protect the bacteria against viruses by cleaving their DNA. The second person, next one, please. The second scientist to share this prize with Charpentier is Jennifer A. Doudna. She's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, USA. Another thing is that they both collaborated and they published their work in 2012, and they got a Nobel Prize in 2020, which is very unprecedented that within 8 years of their first publication in the area, they have been awarded a prize. So you can imagine how significant their contribution, or what a revolutionizing technique they have introduced to the world. So they together reprogrammed these genetic Caesars, which I referred to in my earlier slide, so that these can cut at any DNA molecule at a predetermined site. And wherever this DNA is cut, it is then easy to rewrite the code of life. So it is like, having a micro word processing system for the DNA, where we can cut, copy, and paste rather than, going to the typewriting or to printing and all that. So this is the revolution, the ease and the speed with which one can now edit a gene. It has been possible because of the work of these two women scientists who have generated a molecular Caesar which can cut at the specific point, predetermined site, and we can rewrite at that site using molecules which they have synthesized in the lab or in the test tube, and which can be used anywhere. Next one, please. So using this technology, the researchers can now change the DNA of anything, anything genetic material of animals, plants, microorganisms with highly specificity and precision. The next one, please. So, though I told you that the Doudna and Charpentier published this work in 2000 about the CRISPR mechanism and the molecular seizures, but the discovery of CRISPR was first initially reported by Ishigano et al., the Japanese scientists, for the short segments of DNA with repeated DNA separated by short non-repeating spacer DNA sequences in E. coli gene. These, authors, they showed that there were in the E. coli bacteria, there were repeated segments of DNA, which I have shown here in black, which were separated by another set of DNA, which was not repeated. They were different at all. And later on, by 2002, it was seen this pattern of short repeating and non-repeating DNA sequences were observed in nearly 40% of the bacteria or archaea, which are single cellular organisms. And they were named clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, which is really a mouthful, or CRISPR. So, and later on, Rudd Jensen in the same year observed that these CRISPR sequences, they are always accompanied by another set of sequences, which are named as Cas genes, which is a short form again for CRISPR-associated genes. And later on, it was shown that these Cas genes appear to code for enzymes that could cut DNA. That is, that they had a nucleases activity that they could cut the DNA. The next one, please. Later on, in 2005, Mojica et al., they showed the insight into the origin of these spacers, that how these spacers, which are not repeated in a CRISPR locus, what is the origin? And they observed that the spacer sequences showed similarities with the DNA of the viruses and hypothesized that it could be the bacterial defense mechanism against the bacterial viruses. The next one, please. In 2008, Koener and another Dutch scientist, John van der Oost, they gave the mechanism and they showed that these are indeed the CRISPR are the antiviral defense system in the prokaryotes. They said that the small RNA is derived from the CRISPR, and Cas9, that is the genes which are coding for this enzyme Cas9, together form a defense system, adaptive immune defense system, which can neutralize the virus. So, and this was followed by the work of Charpentier and Doudna. Next one, please. For which they got the Nobel Prize, which was published in Science. That they said that the CRISPR-Cas9 system, can cleave the specific DNA. And not only that this could be CRISPR-Cas, these RNA molecules, that is the tracer RNA, along with the CRISPR RNA, they associate with the Cas9 system, and a cascade of events starts, which activates the Cas to cut at a specific site, which is very complementary to the DNA or the spacer region which they are carrying. So this is tracer RNA and CRISPR RNA, which is then preceded by the spacer region. If you remember, I've shown you that there are repeat regions and they are non-repeat regions. So this refers to the non-repeat region. So this is the one which gives the specificity to the bacterial CRISPR loci to go and cut a particular viral genome. So this is shown over here, that this is this CRISPR RNA and tracer RNA, they can be made into a chimeric molecule, which along with the when it is attached to a spacer RNA, which will go and recognize any sequence which is complementary to it on a double-stranded DNA, and it will activate the Cas9 system to make a double-stranded cut on that DNA, and this can be used to edit the gene. And Cas9 here they are shown as a single, where the CRISPR RNA and the track RNA are attached as a single RNA along with the spacer RNA, and this is known as a single guided RNA, which then gets attached with the Cas9, and then which directs the Cas9 to a particular site which is complementary to this region on that particular DNA molecule segment and will make a double cut. So this is the molecular scissor which they have generated. So next one, please. So how does this CRISPR system work? So I'm giving a very simplified way of its mechanism. So next one, please. So, like I said, this CRISPR system was discovered in the bacteria and single cell archaea, and it stands for clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. So here, the one in green that I'm showing, these are the palindromic repeats of DNA. So what do I mean by the palindromic repeats? That these DNA sequence, we know the DNA is made up of 4 bases, that is adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanosine. So ATCG. So these are a specific sequence which are of the ATCG bases, which are repeated in one, and the same sequence is repeated in all the repeats, okay, in all the CRISPRs. So, and what is the palindromic? That if we read them from left to right or from left to right to left, they read the same. If you remember the English word madam, it reads the same from left to right and right to word. So these are the madams of DNA, that they read same from 5' to 3' end and from 3' end to 5' end. And then they are separated by the non-repeat segments. These are known as the spacer region. So there are certain locations in the genome where one particular DNA sequence is repeated over and over again in the bacteria or in the prokaryotes. Next one, please. And this region is known as the CRISPR locus. Here diagrammatically I'm showing you, this is a CRISPR locus, and these are the CRISPR regions which are the repeats, and this is the spacer region. So CRISPR region DNA loci regions are repeats are about 28 to 37 base pair long, whereas the spacer regions, they are 32 to 38 base pair. Again, to re-emphasize that the CRISPR regions are repeated, but the spacer regions are not repeated, and they are the different for different spacer regions. So may I go to the next slide, please? So this CRISPR system mechanism and these spacer regions, it has been said that they are the bacterial vaccination cards. Like every time a viral bacterial virus will infect a bacteria, it will leave an imprint on the bacterial genome in the form of these spacer regions. So if different viruses are coming and invading the bacteria, so we will have different spacer regions corresponding to each different virus. So how does this virus mechanism work to neutralize or to inhibit or to destroy the viral genome? So it happens in 3 steps. The first step is spacer acquisition, and then next is the CRISPR RNA processing, and the third one is interference. I will speak about these one by one. Next one, please. So when a bacteria is invaded by a virus, here is the bacterial virus, which is also known as a bacteriophage. So it comes and attaches to the surface of the bacteria, and then it injects its viral genome into the bacteria. So when the viral genome is injected into the bacterial genome system will go and cut a part of it. I'm just giving a diagram, so I'm not saying that it will definitely cut at this. It will cut at a specific region, which I'll show you later on. It will take a part of this viral genome and it will go and get attached as a CRISPR locus. Here, like this green one will come and attach here, will be incorporated here. So if an other bacteria comes, it will be like I've shown in a different color. Its genome will be incorporated as a spacer in a different region next, but it has to be surrounded by 2 CRISPR repeats. So that is the importance. The next one, please. The next one, please. So not only this, so as you can see in this diagram, that we have 4 repeats of CRISPR, and there are 4 repeats of spacer, which all are shown in different colors, which means they have come from the different viral genomes. So this is kind of a registry for the bacteria to see that these viruses have already infected it, have come, and so it can provide defense against those viruses. Along with, like I told you earlier also, that the CRISPR locus is always associated with Cas genes, which code for enzymes which are known as Cas enzymes. So the Cas enzymes have both nuclease activity. So what do I mean by a nuclease activity? That we know that the DNA is a double-stranded structure, helical structure. Over here, I'm not showing a helix, but I'm just showing it DNA as a double-stranded structure, which in order to cut the nucleotide, it has to be unwound. If you remember, the helix is wound around itself. So it has to be unwound. So the helicase has the capacity or the specificity to unwind the double DNA helix, and then the nuclease can come and cut the nucleotide, that is, can cut the two strands. So helicase will unwind the DNA and the nuclease will cut the DNA. So the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm sorry, I don't know, I have lost the color in this slide. But again, what happens that this DNA is double-stranded. But one of the strand, which is known as the coding strand of the DNA, it is transcribed into an mRNA, that is a messenger RNA. And the significance of this is this messenger RNA is exactly complementary to the coding strand. And this, next slide, please. Now this coding strand, oh, I think we have missed some slides. Can we go back, please? Yeah, just a little bit more back, please. 2 slides back, 3 slides back. More back. Yes. No, no, even before this, slide before this. Slide before this. Yes. So when a bacterial virus comes and infect the bacteria, no, I think we have to go back. We are going ahead. You have jumped quite a number of slides. Back. Yes. And the next slide now. Yes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is the CRISPR RNA processing system, which is, so what is happening is that this is the mRNA which has been transcribed from the coding strand of the CRISPR locus. And this mRNA has a complementarity, or it's an identical image of the CRISPR locus which was there in the genome. So this mRNA is now processed into CRISPR, small segments of the CRISPR RNA. And this can happen by 3 different types. There are 3 types of mechanism through which this CRISPR locus can be processed into CRISPR RNAs. In the type 1, what happens is there are 2 Cas enzymes, Cas6E and Cas6F. And this CRISPR locus has a loop. If you remember, I said that the CRISPR repeats, they are palindromic sequences. So the property of palindromic sequences, because they are identical from backward and forward, they have a tendency to form a U-pin kind of a structure, and they can base pair. So here they can form a loop kind of a structure. So this is a CRISPR locus, which is in a, where the CRISPR is in a loop kind of a structure, and they are separated by the spacer region. So these Cas enzymes will come and cut this CRISPR mRNA, which carry at places next to the spacer region. So we get now CRISPR RNA with a loop of CRISPR palindromic repeat and a spacer region. So these are known as small CRISPR RNAs. The next one, please. The next one, please. The next one, yes. So in the type 2, again, what happened, this is the CRISPR locus, but if you remember, Charpentier discovered tracer RNA or trans-activating RNA, which could attach to the CRISPR RNA. So this is what happened, the CRISPR, and this is the type 2. Here the tracer RNA will come, and it will come and bind to the CRISPR region of the CRISPR locus. So now what happened? This CRISPR repeat cannot form a loop. If you remember in the earlier slide, this CRISPR region had formed a loop. Because now tracer RNA is bound to it, it cannot form a loop. And it will be again activated by Cas enzymes, and this type 2 has a specific enzyme, Cas9. And it also has enzyme RNase 3 which can cut an RNA. In case the viral genome has a RNA, then it will act on that. But generally, it is being used for Cas9 is the one which is being used because most of the viral genomes are DNA. So what happens now? Once the tracker RNA is attached to the CRISPR region, then Cas9 will come and it will cut this CRISPR locus at the the spacer region. So we will get a CRISPR RNA, which is where the CRISPR loci is attached to the tracer RNA. So two RNAs together, and then it is carrying a spacer region, spacer RNA. So this is the type 2. The next one, please. Type 3 is very simple. There is no loop formation. There is no tracer RNA alignment. And it's simply this Cas enzyme will come and cut it at a place adjacent to the tracer, the spacer region. And we get small RNAs which are CRISPR RNA. So this is how from the CRISPR locus, we get small RNAs which are known as CRISPR RNAs. Now these are the, next slide please. These CRISPR RNAs, then they form the interference along with the, if you remember that the CRISPR locus also has Cas9 genes which code for Cas enzymes. So these or the Cas proteins. So CRISPR Cas proteins along with the CRISPR RNA, they combine together to form the CRISPR Cas9 system, which interferes with the viral genome so that it cannot infect the bacteria again. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. Yeah. So here, how does it interfere? So when a virus comes and infects the bacteria and injects its viral genome, the CRISPR RNA, again, because we have different types of CRISPR RNA process, so there are 3 ways through which it can neutralize the virus genome. So in the CRISPR RNA, which was generated by the type 1 mechanism, this CRISPR RNA, which has a loop, it will go and bind at this region of the viral genome. It will scavenge the viral genome for a region which is very specific to the spacer region that this RNA, CRISPR RNA Cas system is carrying. But it is not that this, like I told you, that the viral genome is cut and is integrated into the CRISPR locus. It has to go and bind, it is cut at a specific place. There is a specific sequence in the viral genome, which is known as protospacer adjacent motif, or PAM for short. So when the viral genome is cut for the first time, before it is integrated into the bacterial genome, it will come and cut at a particular space, so which is at the PAM region. So this spacer region will also carry a PAM region. So this Cas9 has a ability to now go and scavenge this viral genome, and it will go and bind at a particular region where PAM is there. And it will align this CRISPR RNA. The next one, please. So this CRISPR-Cas9 molecules is scavenging the viral genome to identify the region which is complementary to its spacer region and the PAM region. So it doubles the specificity for the recognition of the specific DNA region. So once that region is recognized, it aligns itself and the Cas enzyme cascade is activated. That means now the nuclease activity and helicase activity are activated, to simply say it in a very simple form. And that will lead to the cutting of the viral genome. Here I have shown. And this way, the virus genome is inactivated and it is not able to now further process inside the bacterial genome. The next one, please. The type 2 system is similar. The only thing is we have a different CRISPR-Cas9 system where there is no loop, and instead of a different Cas enzyme, which is Cas9 over here. So once small CRISPR-Cas9, once a bacterial virus is infecting, This CRISPR-Cas9 will again go and bind the virus at a specific region which is complementary to the spacer region as well as at a place, because this spacer region is complementary to the PAM region also. So it will go and bind at that region and align itself over there, and this will activate the Cas9 system. So the Cas9 system will make a double-stranded cut in the that is in both the strands of the DNA. It will make a cut, and this will then cut the viral genome and it will neutralize it. So it is almost similar to that, except that we have a different enzyme Cas9, and we have a different but the effect is the same. The third one, next one please, is the CRISPR type 3, which is very simple, like I told you, and it does not require PAM, but it will go and bind the DNA where the viral genome where it is complementary to its spacer region, and it will make double-stranded cuts, and it will cut the viral genome into small pieces. So this is how a virus is inactivated by the CRISPR-Cas system. So next slide, please. So to summarize or to give a review, that the first step in the CRISPR-Cas bacterial immune adaptive system is that there is a spacer acquisition from the viral genome which invades the bacteria and which is incorporated in the CRISPR locus in between the CRISPR repeats. And this, like I told earlier, this acts like a bacterial vaccination card against those viruses. And then this is transcribed into mRNA, which is complementary to the coding strand. And from there, there's CRISPR RNA. The small CRISPR RNAs are processed, which provide the which contain a CRISPR locus as well as a spacer RNA. So these, and along with it in the CRISPR-Cas9 system, we have a tracer RNA, and together they bind to the Cas enzyme, activate it, and then this Cas enzyme will neutralize the viral genome. So this is in a nutshell is the way a CRISPR-Cas9 works to cut the DNA at a specific region. The next one, please. So like I told you that CRISPR-Cas9 has revolutionized the gene editing. So what is gene editing? Gene editing is when we can either remove a gene, a nucleotide sequence, one or more than one, from a double-stranded DNA, or we can add new sequences to a DNA. So when gene editing targeted changes are made like deletions and in assertion, it is known as a gene editing of an organism's genome. It's not that the CRISPR-Cas is providing us a new, is the first time that the gene editing is being done. Gene editing has been there for at least for 2 decades. People have been able to edit the gene, that is they can cut the DNA at a specific site or add a particular DNA nucleotide sequence at a particular site. But the way the technology has been provided to do this work is what is the beauty in this mechanism. Now this is like comparing it, like I told you earlier, like earlier you had to the techniques which were available, they are very cumbersome and they are expensive and they are not very easily adaptable. But the CRISPR-Cas9 has provided is it's very easily available, adaptable, easy to do in the lab. So the next one, please. So, so CRISPR, taking a cue from the nature, from the bacterial adaptive immune system, these 2 scientists, Doudna and Charpentier, they have they said that the CRISPR-Cas9 has ability to efficiently locate specific genetic sequences and cut them, which I have shown you earlier. That complementary to that spacer region, if you have any DNA sequence which is complementary to the, that spacer region, it can be cut very specifically by the Cas9 enzyme system. So Charpentier and Doudna modified the CRISPR system from the bacterial system, using that as a template, into a pair of molecular scissors which could cut any gene at any position. So that is the beauty. The next one, please. So how does CRISPR-Cas9 and gene editing it is taking place? The next one, please. So just suppose we want to knock out a gene, one from a genome. Supposing I have a set of cells from where I want to remove a gene 1. And this represents the double-stranded DNA, which is carrying that gene 1. So what do I need? I need a CRISPR-Cas system. That is, I need CRISPR RNAs, I need tracer RNA, I need Cas9 enzyme, and then I need something from where I am cutting the gene. If I want to replace, supposing this gene is a mutant gene, defective gene, if I want to replace it with a gene which is the wild type or which is a normal gene, then I need a sequence of nucleotides which can be added. So I need all this, but they are not present in this petri dish because this petri dish only contains the genome of the cell where we want to knock out the gene 1. So, but what we can do is we can synthesize all these components of the CRISPR into a plasmid. And so they will be having CRISPR regions, they will be having tracer region, they will be having Cas9 region, and they will have this nucleotide sequence which we want to insert. So this plasmid can then be transferred to the petri dish where the cells are there carrying this genome from where we want to knock out the gene. So, and how do we do this? There are various mechanisms. We can do electroporation, we can do transfection, we can use inactivated viruses, we can use other viruses like adenovirus or lentiviruses to transfer this plasmid to the cell's nucleus region. So once it reaches inside the cell, what happens using the cell's host machinery, this plasmid is transcribed into like I had shown you, into a CRISPR locus. Okay. So we now, and it is processed and we get CRISPR RNA along with the tracer RNA and a Cas9. So this is the genome of the cell from where we want to knock out the gene. And this is the system which has been generated using the plasmid where we had incorporated all the components of the CRISPR-Cas9 system. So what will it do? Once the CRISPR-Cas9 system is activated, it will go and scavenge the genome of the cell where it will bind to a complementary sequence. So here we have made a CRISPR-Cas9 where the spacer region is complementary to the gene 1. So part of the gene 1. It cannot be very long. So it is to the part of the gene 1. So here it will go and align itself next to the place where it is complementary to the DNA sequence of the genome. Since we want the gene 1 to be knocked out, so we have made this RNA to be complementary to the gene 1 region. So it will go and bind at a specific place. Like in the bacteria, we have PAM sequences. So we have to have a sequence which is complementary, and that has to be incorporated in the Cas9 system. A complementary analog of PAM in the genome, where it will go and specifically, Cas9 will specifically bind. And once it is bound, what will it do? It will activate the Cas9 system, and the Cas9 system will make a double-stranded break in the DNA, producing two ends. And this way it has been. Now these two ends have been generated. So we have free base nucleotide bases here. Now what happens? The next one, please. These two ends. Next one. Yes. So now the double-stranded breaking DNA, it has two methods to repair double-strand breaks. It can join, these ends can join either through a non-homologous end joining, and which brings the two ends together, and it is a error prone, that some mistake will be carried out. It may not be exactly, so some gene nucleotides will be left out. Or it can be a homology directed repair, which uses sister chromatid chromosome as a template. That is, we direct that what kind of a nuclear sequence will come and bind over here. So remember, we had incorporated the, supposing we wanted to remove a defective gene and in its place, we want to put a wild type gene, which is normal. So we have attached that sequence of that normal gene. So it will go through the homologous recombination, it will go and bind. I mean, it's a several step process, which I'm not showing over here. But the idea is to tell you that once we have created a cut in the double-stranded DNA, if we want to knock out a gene, we can let it join through non-homologous end joining, which is error-prone. So it will introduce error in the gene, or it will the ends can be joined even without introducing any other nucleotide molecules, and it will knock out the gene. So this is how the gene 1 will be knocked out, and the two ends will be joined, and the gene 1 will not be there. Or if we want to replace it, or we want to add some normal gene, instead of a mutant gene, we can knock in a gene which will have which is replacing the mutant gene with a normal gene 1. So the next one. So this is how the CRISPR-Cas9 is used for gene editing. So what Doudna and Charpentier have done is that they have created, these chimeric CRISPR-Cas9 system, where they have joined the CRISPR RNA along with the with CRISPR tracker with track RNA. So these loops, they show the CRISPR RNA, and then they are attached with the tracker RNA. And then to this, they add a complementary region. Instead of a bacterial spacer region, now here you can have any RNA sequence complementary to the region where you want to go and do a gene editing. So this is a target complementary region. So you have now a chimeric RNA molecule in a single RNA. So this is known as a single guided RNA, and this can be easily synthesized in the lab. And depending on which region you want to cut or which region you want to edit, you can keep changing this region, because this region remains the same, okay? But this region can be modified. So it is like, having not rewired your computer every time you want to add a software to it, but that you can just have to change the software and you can add something. So this is how easy it has become. The next one, please. So how does this work? Like I told you earlier, this chimeric RNA, which is known as guide RNA, which consists of the CRISPR region, this repeats, and also the tracker region, and then it has a complementary RNA molecule which corresponds to the spacer region. So this RNA, when it is attached with the Cas9 system, it unwinds the double-stranded DNA. Remember, I told you that it has a helicase activity, allowing the guide RNA to base pair with the one strand. And then once it base pair with the one strand, which is complementary to it, it creates a cut in that strand. And then it creates another cut in the other strand. There are two different types of enzymes, nucleases, which are involved in cutting, but they are both present in the Cas9. Okay, one is known as HNH and other one is known as RUVC. So the idea is that one cuts the strand which is base pairing, and the other one cuts the other strand. So creating a double-stranded cut in both the strands. So this is how simple it is to cut a strand which is of a genomic DNA in a very specific way. The next one, please. So this slide is picked up from the citation, the Nobel Prize citation, where they have shown how the CRISPR-Cas9 seizures they work. So it just shows that when researchers are going to edit a genome using these molecular or the genetic seizures, they artificially construct a guide RNA, okay, which is a chimeric RNA consisting of a tracker RNA and also the CRISPR repeats, and also a region which is complementary where they want to cut the DNA. So they artificially construct a guide RNA which matches the DNA code where the cut is to be made. The seizure protein, that is the Cas9, forms a complex with the guide RNA, which takes the Caesar to the region where it has to go and cut. So first we have a guide RNA, which along with the Cas9, it form the genetic Caesars or the molecular Caesars. And these molecular Caesars will then come to the region which is complementary, where we want to make a cut. And the Cas9 system will be activated and it will make a double-stranded cut in one strand of the DNA. And now this DNA double strand has two ways. Like I told you, it can either the blunt ends can join non-homologously, or they can be joined by the side-directed homology. So either they can be blunt end can be joined and the gene can be knocked out, or we can incorporate a specific sequence using the template for repair, and we can add a DNA which we want to incorporate or to replace the defective or the knocked out DNA. So this is as simple. Next one, please. So this CRISPR-Cas has revolutionized gene editing. Why? Because it is so fast. It is relatively cheap. I have heard that now you can even order a specific CRISPR-Cas9 system through the Amazon. People are getting it. And it has become so common to synthesize this CRISPR-Cas9. It's very precise and it is very easy to use. Next one, please. So what are the various applications? I will just take a few, because in the last 4 or 5 years, the application or the patents which have been applied for using CRISPR-Cas9 technology, they have gone 1,000-fold up. I have not shown that slide, but if you go from 1 or 2 in 2013, they are running into thousands now. And in fact, there are a lot of patent issues also coming around regarding this technology. Probably that can be taken up in another lecture. So in the lab, they are in the research. One of the major application is for generating knockout mice with CRISPR-Cas9. That is, we want to study the function of a particular gene or a particular molecule, what role it has in the organism. So we need to knock out that particular gene from that genome and see if we knock out that gene, what happens to the organism. For that, people are using transgenic mice, but generating transgenic mice has been very expensive, and only few places they can be generated. Even in India, though, people are doing it, but it's not very common. But using this technology, CRISPR-Cas9 technology, we can introduce the changes at the zygote, where you can add CRISPR-Cas9 system and introduce the mutation and add it and let it grow into blastocyst, and this blastocyst is then transferred to the mice, and the pups which are generated, then they are screened whether they are carrying that gene, which can be done very easily by the PCR screening, and in less than 3 weeks you have a knockout mice with almost 100% efficiency. So it's not that the CRISPR-Cas9 is 100% efficient. I have not gone into the limitations. Probably that can be taken up. But like I said, it is very specific that it will go and knock out the gene at a particular target. But there could be in a genome, there could be sequences which may not be exactly similar to the one which we have incorporated in our CRISPR-Cas9 system, but which may have 99% homology, or maybe more than 90% homology. So they can be off-site targets also. So that can reduce the efficiency of the system. But people who are, from where I picked up this, they said that they were able to generate mice which had almost 100% efficiency with a gene knockout, which is really great. It is efficient, cheap, and fast. Next one, please. This CRISPR-Cas9 system has also been very useful in generating disease models in the stem cells. So the stem cells are the cells which have, are either obtained from the embryonic stages, and they have what is so important with the stem cell, they have unlimited capacity to proliferate, and they can be and they have a pluripotency properties. The stem cells can be differentiated into different cells, like the stem cells we obtain from the embryonic system. They can be differentiated into a heart cell, they can be differentiated into a liver cell, they can be differentiated into a neuron cell. So they can be differentiated into any cell type, giving them a particular kind of a stimulus or the environmental conditions. So if we want to say make a disease model, then what we do, supposing like we have just started this work in our lab in PGI, and like we are working in a disease called cardiomyopathy, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, where there is a gene, myosin binding protein C or myosin heavy chain, which have a mutation, and because of this mutation, the heart is pumping is irregular, or it's defective, and it leads to the hypertrophy, that the enlargement of the heart, and it can lead to if it happens in very young children, it can lead to even and if the mutation is lethal, it can lead to very early or premature death, or it can lead to a lot of complications. It leads to the heart failure. So supposing we know the family from where this, because these genetic mutations many times, or 50% of the time, they are familial, that a family carries that gene mutation. So if I pick up a cell, stem cell, it's not possible to take a heart cell. So what we are doing in the lab is that we are generating induced pluripotent stem cells from the patients. We take the blood cells of the patient and we convert those blood cells into induced pluripotent stem cell. That is, the blood cells are converted into cells which are almost similar to the stem cell, because they can be converted now into a heart cell. So these are known as a somatic cell has been taken, and which can be converted into a pluripotent cell. So if I've taken the stem cell from a patient, the blood from a patient which is carrying a particular mutation, okay, over here, see, I've generated from the induced pluripotent stem cell, from that blood cell I have generated induced pluripotent stem cell with mutation. Now I can generate this induced pluripotent stem cell, I can differentiate into a cardiomyocyte, that is a heart cell, okay, and then I can these stem cells have property to proliferate, so they will make a kind of a organ like of a thing that you will get a phenotype which is comparable to the cardiomyocytes of the heart of a patient. Now using the CRISPR-Cas technology, I can, supposing it was carrying a mutation. Now I correct this mutation using CRISPR-Cas9, that I remove the defect in the nucleotide which was there and replace it with the correct nucleotide. So now I have a corrected iPSC. Okay, so now I can look at this cell both at molecular level and as well as I can look at the functioning of the cell at a electrophysiological level and compare the two. And that will give me a disease model that what is the defective in a mutated cell compared to the cell with a which has been corrected. And this can help us as a disease model for testing drugs, for generating, finding the new mechanism through which the disease is being progressing, or the disease etiology. So it is a good model. I've just given you an example, but this CRISPR-Cas9 technology is now being used to generate disease models using either induced pluripotent stem cells or human or embryonic stem cells, and it's a good model. The next one, please. So not only that, here only. So this has been this paper was published in 2015, where the gene auditing with Cas9 in adult mice was shown to correct a disease mutation and phenotype. So these authors, they have shown that using this technology, they could correct a metabolic genetic disorder which is known as tyrosinemia in the mouse hepatocytes. So it has shown a direct application. So the next one, please. So and this is similar to what work we are doing, where people from the Oregon have shown that they could correct a pathogenic gene mutation in a human embryo. They have used discarded human embryos, and from there they have taken up and corrected a myosin binding protein C mutation by generating cardiomyocytes, and they could show that the corrected myocytes were able to beat regularly, and their mechanism was very similar to the normal myocytes. The next one, please. So not only that, the CRISPR-Cas9 technology has been used, is being tried, and it has not been used clinically, but it's in the preclinical stages to generate organs for transplantation in the pigs. Pigs, have the pig organs are very similar to the human organ in size, and also genetically they are not as badly rejected as compared to the mice or other systems. So what they are doing is that using CRISPR-Cas, but there is a disadvantage that the pigs have a lot of viral infections. So once the pig's organs are used, the human immune system will identify those viruses, or they will destroy the organ once they are transplanted. So scientists are using the CRISPR-Cas9 technology to remove the viruses from the pig organs and then use them for transplantation. Not only that, they are also using these Cas9 viruses to provide these organs with the immune system, which will not be rejected by the human immune system. They are making it which is compatible with the human immune system, so the organs are not rejected. So it has an application in organ transplantation, which is a need of the hour, because the demand for the organs is much more than they are available generally. The next one, please. So the CRISPR system has been also used to remove the viral genome, HIV viral genome. And because we know the HIV viral genome will go and integrate with the host viral genome, so they said that you could cut the viral genome by using CRISPR-Cas9, and then the virus genome will not be able to integrate with integrated will be separated, and it will not be able to propagate, and it will not multiply or replicate. So similar, next one, please. This is also a similar principle is being used for suppressing hepatitis B virus. The next one, please. And the CRISPR has been also in preclinical stage or in the experimental stages in treating the cancers and in blood disorders. So how is it being done? The investigators, they extract immune cells from the men and women and use CRISPR to genetically alter them to attack cancer cells. The edited cells will then be infused back into the patients, and this has specific applications where the cancers are especially also in the cancer where there are mutations. So you can correct the mutation, and then in the stem cell in the cells, immune cell in the cells, and you can put them back and incorporate. But the immune system is very important in fighting the cancer, so they are trying to modify the immune cells and then give them back and back to the patient so that they can fight the disease better. And it has a big application in treating blood disorders like beta thalassemia and sickle cell, where again there is a genetic disorder. It's caused by the mutations in the same gene, and they are being CRISPR-Cas9 is used to correct that gene mutation and to be used back in the patient so that the defect is removed. The next one, please. CRISPR-Cas9 gene has been also used to eradicate malaria. So a gene drive made with the CRISPR could suppress a population. These authors have shown of Anopheles gambiae, the type of mosquito that transmits malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. So it has application in the malarial eradication. The next one, please. And CRISPR-Cas9 can also be used in disease diagnosis. Viruses work by turning the cells into factories for their DNA. So a CRISPR-based test could pick out that foreign DNA from just a drop of blood, spit, or urine, and report it in minutes if you have got dengue or yellow fever or the novel coronavirus circulating in your body. The next one, please. So CRISPR has also been used in human genome editing. In fact, Chinese scientists reported that scientist of China that he had genetically modified the human embryo, and he produced two girls, babies, which were resistant to HIV infection. And scientists are using this CRISPR technology to modify the gene responsible for beta thalassemia, like I told you, and unviable. For this, they use unviable human embryos that are left from the IVF, and mutation in the gene is corrected in single stretch say. But CRISPR is not efficient in this because there could be off-target regions also. So this is still in a experimental stage and has not reached any particular stage. Next one, please. But the use of the human embryos or the germline to edit the gene editing has, created opened a Pandora's box from the ethical points of view. Ethical points, because research is needed, but we cannot use the germline to modify or to generate, CRISPR babies, which are designer babies or something. So that has to be discouraged. And people, there is an association of formed, have called upon the national academies that from the US National Academy of Sciences and US National Academy of Medicine and the Royal Society and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which are very active in this area, to take the lead in creating an ongoing international forum to discuss potential clinical uses of genetic editing and to help inform decisions by national policymakers and others, and to formulate recommendations and guidelines to promote coordination among nations. That is, that the CRISPR gene editing should not be used indiscriminately and should not be used at germline, and so it has to be approved by the ethical committees of each and every country or their committees, so that it is used responsibly and ethically. The next one, please. So what is the future of CRISPR? So CRISPR is still mostly a biologist buzzword, but just as computers evolved from a nerdy niche tool for math geeks to ubiquitous invisible extension of our own bodies being used everywhere, so CRISPR will one day weave seamlessly into the fabric of our physical reality, and it will simply be the way to solve a problem if that problem is remotely genetic in nature. So that is the vista or the expansion or the imagination you can think the CRISPR can go to, and that is probably has led the scientists to get the Nobel Prize within 8 years of its first discovery. So the next one, please. Thank you for your patient hearing, and I hope I was able to put across some things for a very general audience. Thank you once again.
So thank you. Yeah,
I would like to ask.
So thank you for a very illuminating talk. So there are a few queries, and that will get posed to you. And the first one is from our president himself. So, Mr. Dharamveer.
Thank you for such a illuminating lecture. And we had one similar lecture on gene editing, named as Intruding in God's Domain, in February 2019. And speaker was Professor Jairoop Singh, former Vice Chancellor of one of the central universities. And during this discussion with him, and now I see more elaboration on gene editing and CRISPR technologies, we felt that it is one of the most potential tools for bioterrorism. How does the scientific community, law experts, deal with possible misuse of CRISPR technologies?
CRISPR technology as such is as an extension or is a tool for gene editing technology. Like I said, it's not the first technique which is going to people are going to use for gene editing. There have been techniques available like zinc fingers and talons and other wayside directed mutagenesis. So gene editing itself is a very potential tool for bioterrorism, because you can generate, because what is gene editing? In gene editing, you can either remove a part of a gene or you can add a new part of a gene, a nucleotide sequence. So you, by adding a new gene or adding a part of the new gene sequence or a particular gene sequence, you can change the genetic makeup of that organism. Supposing now there was a lot of I don't know whether it is scientific or not. They were saying that this coronavirus is genetically made, modified. The coronaviruses are there in the bats, but they said that coronavirus was genetically modified in a Chinese lab, and it was made so that it could infect, humans, because generally they infect uh, the bats, but they said they introduce certain changes at the genetic level. And how do you introduce those changes at genetic level? Is through gene editing. And the role of CRISPR in bioterrorism is that it is such a simple technique. Like, you could now make people can make bombs at home. You can have home generated bombs. Whereas earlier it used to need a very specific or a very special labs to generate dynamite. Now these are made in small rooms. Where so CRISPR-Cas9 technology, like I told you, is so simple that people are, supposing I want to knock out a gene or I want to edit a gene, I can send a gene sequence which I want to do to they are now biotechnology companies which will generate those for you and incorporate into CRISPR-Cas9 system, and they will send it to you via Amazon to your lab. And you, in your own laboratory, you can, in your petri dish, you can do the CRISPR-Cas9 editing for that particular, which was not possible. It took me, we had done some site-directed mutagenesis for our hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It took us more than a year to, get back to the technology every time. So it is like, rewiring the computer for generating every different kind of software, or you can just have a software which will allow you to do things same again and again by just clicking on the computer itself. So it is that simple. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So there are a few more questions, but you have already answered most of them. Okay, has it been tried on humans? Is it trusted or applied, or any other e-certificate? So most of the questions you have already answered.
So would others like to ask the audience? There are very distinguished audience.
We can unmute you if you type in the message.
Can they speak? As
Your message, they go.
Dua sir,
Dua ji.
Dua ji.
Professor Dua. Unmute Professor Dua.
Cannot hear.
Can you hear me? Thank you.
No.
Professor Dua.
Thank you very much, Professor Kohler, for such a elaborate talk, especially on the day when it is Sir C.V. Raman's birthday today. And that's wonderful that you have added flavor to the cake also. Now, the question is that you said it twice or thrice, that so far as the 8-year duration and then Nobel Prize. But 2 years back, it was shown that this particular technique also induces cancer by regulation of P53 protein. And in the 4 consecutive paper, which are confirmed that it can lead to cancer when this technique is used, and it has been confirmed. So do you think with these negative developments, also simultaneously, a quick Nobel Prize in 8 years without taking into consideration the negative aspect of that one has been given? And my second, Yes, please.
Let me answer this question first, then I'll come to your second question, because so that I stay relevant to what you are asking. So I have not gone because there was a limited time and I wanted to give an overview. So CRISPR technology, like I told you, it can go off target, which is there for other editing technologies also. So, but now in the last 5 years, I have only talked about a CRISPR-Cas9 system which they have derived from Streptococcus pyogenes or Streptococcus. Now people are generating Cas9, which is the enzyme which exactly does the cutting and which carries the CRISPR RNA to the particular site. So people are modifying this CRISPR-Cas9 system so that the specificity increases. The P53 activation that you are talking about, it is because there is an off-site targeting. If the CRISPR-Cas9, which was generated for a particular site, has a site similar in the P53. Okay, so if it inactivates that, then it is not a very good site. So people are modifying and people are generating now different Cas9 systems. I have not gone into it. They are which are very specific, and I'm sure it has still not gone into clinical practice. So it will not come into clinical practice unless people are very sure that it is going to go and bind at that particular site, and also because of its off-targeting systems and its potential danger. People at the moment, even the preclinical study which are being done, they are being done in the labs, in the petri dishes. They take the cells from the patient and they modify them in the petri dish, and then they are released immune cells. So once the CRISPR, once the cell gene editing has been done, the CRISPR-Cas9 is not there in that cell. It will be removed. So it will not go and act in vivo. So these are in vivo vitro systems which are being used, and then these cells are being given to the patients for the cure. But they have not reached the clinical or the preclinical stage. They are not being used as such. But you're saying, I think the Nobel Prize they have been given is for the potential of this technology. Like this, it has, like I told you, like you had earlier typing, and then now you have Microsoft word processing system. So it is that simple that instead of going and typing each word, it has enhanced the speed. It has brought about the specificity. It is fast. It is cheap. And it has lot of applications. Any application can be used in a bad way or a nice way. It depends on the people who use it. So I can now take up your second question.
Yeah, that is, there is a big lobby in Western world. There are two lobbies which are working.
अच्छा ये एक थोड़ा सा कंफ्यूजन लग रहा है कि कल एक दो पुलिस वाले भी आए.
Hello, can I continue?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Now the two lobbies that they want to say that something which has been done by CRISPR-Cas technology should not be classified as a genetically modified organism or a plant, so that it does not go through the protocol of the sanctions and regulation. Whereas Greenpeace lobby, which is spending billions of rupees, they want this to be categorized as a genetically modified organism. What is your personal opinion to that one?
I feel it is a genetically modified organism.
Okay.
Especially in the plant crops, they are using, where they are introducing resistant genes which are resistant to the viruses, or they are resistant to the, but they are saying that we are not introducing something which is not already there. So really, I have not given it much thought. But Dr. Dua, the CRISPR discovery was from the yogurt industry. The CRISPR was first identified by the yogurt makers, the Danish company Dansko, where the scientists they realized that they were looking at that there were particular cultures of the Staphylococcus, I think, or whatever, I don't remember. That when they were looking at that when they in fact they were used as cultures to inoculate the milk. the milk stayed for a longer time correct. They were not destroyed. And then when they looked at the genetic makeup, they found that they had CRISPR regions which were interspaced by the regions which were the spacer regions which corresponded to the different viral genomes, and so they are naturally present in the bacteria. And when when you make the yogurt, they are used to, these cultures are used, they prolong the life of the yogurt because they become resistant to the infection of the viruses. So the shelf life of the yogurt is increased. So I really can't comment much, but if naturally, if you're genetically, if you introduce something very new, which is not there in that particular crop, and you introduce a new crop, like I was reading that they are making some ground cherries, where they have groundnuts and then they have cherries and they have mangoes. I think it is a genetically modified thing.
If I go by your verdict, I think these organisms will be only in North America and never in Europe because of the resistance to being categorized as genetically modified. And you will have a lopsided word also, where, in USA, there are 32 genetically modified crop, and in Europe, there is none, though they import most of them. So
I am myself not in favor of genetically modified crops, and I think they are also facing problems. People who have, even in those in the plant. I did not read much about the botany part, plant part, but they are not able to release these because if they become disease resistant, or they can spread all over somewhere, and it can create havoc in the crops. So people
similarly CRISPR.
Yeah.
And yes, then it will.
So anything which is done with the germline, I think, should be very nicely discussed and should not be used immediately. But the CRISPR-Cas9 technology has the ability to correct at the somatic level also. Okay, so I think that is a big application, and it is not in only with the genetics. Now people are coming up. I did not have time that they are, if you go and look at the craziest uses of CRISPR-9 for biofuels, they are using it. They are even using for biocementing, and they're saying even for the, a lot of other things they are going to use it. So the imagination as wild as it can run by the scientists. So it may have non-biogenetic uses also.
Yeah, thank you.
Professor Kent.
Please unmute yourself, Professor Kent, sir.
Thank you, Professor Koehler, for such a complex subject making so easy regarding biological buzzword, as you said, for a person who know nothing about biology. Let me thank you, madam.
It's an honor getting this compliment from you, Professor Kent. I really feel very happy about it.
And my question is really, you might be surprised. It's every time you use it is so easy. It is so easy to do this, that, and all that. Is it easy in that case? Is it possible to put a elephant trunk on a human being so that he will be satisfied with this Ganesha Puja and all that?
See, I told you it's up to your imagination. That where you can, I did not tell you that you can modify multiple genes at a time, like to convert a elephant trunk head into an elephant trunk. Thousands of millions of genes have to be sequences have to be changed. But they say CRISPR-Cas9 technology, by modifying small fragments of the genes, you can introduce multiple editing at the same time. So it should be possible. You have to just let your imagination run wild and try it. That is what it is.
Thanks.
Next, Mr. Labh Singh wants to ask something. Mr. Labh Singh.
Yes. Good afternoon. I really appreciate Dr. Koehler for a very informative talk regarding a very complex subject. My question was very simple. Like I wanted to ask something like a procedure about the development of the vaccine. So, ma'am, if you can just a little bit throw light on like if we are developing a vaccine for the COVID, I mean, what are the stages in the development of the vaccine? That is number one. And second is how do you evaluate the progress of the development of vaccine? I mean, if you can kindly tell us.
It is very different from what I have talked. CRISPR can be used to identify the genome of the coronavirus. It can cut the coronavirus. It can sequence, it can help in the sequencing or in identification. What I said was in the diagnosis of the coronavirus or a dengue virus. I did not say it is being used for the production of the vaccine. So I have not come across, maybe I have not done enough literature search, where CRISPR is being used for the formation of the vaccine. So I'm sorry, Love Singh.
Because what exactly I wanted to, I mean, I was worried about that people are waiting for the vaccine for COVID and nothing is coming up, you know.
They are in the clinical stage, preclinical stage, and they are in stage 2 and clinical phase 3. So I think they will come. Wait, in February, Indian biotech, Bharat Biotech company says they will have a vaccine by February.
Okay, I mean, that will be great if it comes that fast. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.
और क्वेश्चन पूछिए, कोई पूछना चाह रहा है?
Yes, Professor Ken.
One of the comments by an expert is, even if the vaccine is developed, you cannot rest assured that you will have to, our lifestyle will have to be changed. You cannot live in the manner you have been living, even if the vaccine has been developed and nobody knows what's going to be the level of its efficiency and how long it's going to be safe. In any case, one has to see, keep on different.
So if there are no more questions, we would like to close the question and answer session. And I would now request our director, Professor Dheeraj Sanghi, for his observations.
Thank you very much. A wonderful, wonderful talk. We hear so many webinars these days, but this one was like, I'm so lucky to have been present here. People in engineering like me, particularly from IT background, we tend to believe that the world revolves only around IT these days. Technologies which are other than IT, particularly in the biological sphere, I think it's eye-opening as well as humbling, experience. Of course, very slightly we touched upon at the end issues of ethics, bioterrorism, etc. And I think I really wish the world will learn how to have only positive use of technology. But from past experience, that hope, I don't know how justified that hope is, but that's a concern that I would definitely like to express here. And I would really like to thank SPSTI to do these things out of PEC, and we would like to keep doing such webinars hosted at PEC, even
His connection is slow. You can please conclude, sir. Because he's not. Connection is too slow.
संगी साहब सुनाई नहीं दे रहा आपका?
Unmute.
अनम्यूट कीजिए. Unmute. Unmute. आप कर दो ना unmute इनको.
No, I'm unmuted now. I didn't realize that I was speaking and the video was frozen. Until suddenly this said, you know, I'm no longer in the. And I have to reconnect. Sorry about that. But basically, what I was saying was a wonderful experience to listen to a talk other than, you know, IT and engineering kind of stuff that we keep listening. We are a little bit concerned about what was very, you know, small discussion on this issue of ethics and bioterrorism, particularly. I don't have a lot of hope looking at how we have used technologies in the past, but I still will say, you know, would express my hope that the mankind would learn how to use only, you know, positively these technologies. I would like to, you know, have SPSTI come over anytime they want to host any webinar or a real seminar when you know, times permit in the post-COVID world. It is a pleasure to host such seminars or webinars from our campus. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Saki-san.
Thank you, Professor Sanghi. So to conclude, I would like to thank our speaker once again, our entire audience made up of very distinguished people as well as young people from the schools and the colleges and the colleagues from the Chandigarh institutions. So our next lecture would be on SPSTI's next lecture would be on November 11th. What is the topic? And it's another series.
11 नहीं है, 10th है.
Not 10th. Our next lecture is on November 10th, and we are initiating a new series called Online Science Playground. Our president SPSTI had a very nice idea that whatever happens in California in the form of science playground, that is a physical science playground. So in the days of pandemic, we can start an online science playground by asking the scientists to speak from their own labs. So it is their playground. They should share it with our audience. So a scientist along with his students from his playground shares with us as to what they do, how they do, and what is the important challenging questions they are tackling at present. So with that thought, our first lecture in that series would be given by Professor Shankar Ghosh from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Shankar had got the Bhatnagar Award in the year 2019. He has visited Chandigarh a couple of times already. He is known to be a very energetic and restless speaker, and he has many great work to his credit as a student at Indian Institute of Science, and later on, he was inducted into the TIFR system as a regular scientist even before he had finished his PhD. These are the credentials of Shankar Ghosh. He does very unusual experiments. So we thought he is an apt person to be invited on the science playground. Whatever he wants to do, he builds the instruments related to that in his own lab. And every student is given something new to do. That is, these are the credentials of Shankar Ghosh. So it would be a good way to start the series with Shankar Ghosh. And the next lecture in that series would be given by this year's Bhatnagar awardee from Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, that is Rajesh Kankal. So the first two lectures are in this series are by young scientists from their own playgrounds, along with their own students. So we are looking forward to this exciting new series commencing on 10th of November. So I would like to invite all of you to join for that series, particularly encourage children and grandchildren at home to come and watch that series. So thank you very much. And I hand over to Kiaji for the conclusion.
Thank you. Very nice concluding remarks have been given. And once again, I wish to put on record our gratitude for Professor Sanghi, the Director of PEC, and all who participated in today's seminar. Please cast the word around that we are having this particular series of lectures in Nobel Prize. And we are including the literature, peace, and economics lectures. And I think scientists will also benefit from. So, of course, so everybody who has been here, including Anuj and Manipal, who have been managing the system and maintaining a bit of liaison with the speakers as well as the audience. So thank you once again, audience above all, and please bring more audience. With this, we finish today's talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. We say goodbye to
Our email ID and website is displayed here. You can visit our website for
Any
regular
questions?
updates
Leave any
on
questions.
latest events and leave any question at info@spsta.org. Our experts would be there to answer your questions. Thank you.
And finally, I thank Professor Dheeraj Sanghi for making his infrastructure available to us so generously.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We'll just say goodbye then. ये बात कर लेना सारा लिया ना
एक लड़के ने कुछ दिन पहले बहुत अच्छा क्वेश्चन पूछा था और चिल्ड्रंस प्रोग्राम पे की पोस्टिंग दी. So I asked